Sometime back, I was interviewing someone for a role in my team, and I asked him to describe himself. He listed down a few points about his likes and dislikes, his good and bad qualities, and so on. After listening to all his points, I said, "But I didn't ask for your good and bad qualities. You could have just told me about your characteristics." He got confused and said, "Come on, what's the difference?" Can you guess what's the difference? Well, he wasn't wrong at his place, but the fact that I want to point out is we usually do not describe anything for what it is. Somehow we feel the need to describe everything in terms of being good or bad without even realizing. We generally do not describe or understand people or situations as plain facts. Something our news channels, at least here in India, need to learn. Well, jokes apart, today I am going to talk about the 3 characteristics or Gunas that constitute our Prakriti, the manifest cosmic energy. In simple terms, the 3 characteristics of the entire universe: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. In general, people think all which is bad is Tamas and all which is good is Sattva. I won't say it is an incorrect understanding, but is it the complete explanation of these characteristics? Have we understood them as what they are in their basic form before adding adjectives to them? Let's do it today. Today, let us understand the 3 Gunas as plain characteristics in their very crude form. And then we'll also see when and why they are termed as positive or negative. If you just want to understand the 3 Gunas, then go ahead and listen to the episode. But if you also want to understand what does it mean to have Sattvic and Tamasic Ahankar and how the Panchatattva, Tanmatras, senses of action and perception relate with them, then you might want to listen to the previous 2 episodes on Panchatattva and Ahankar, episodes 18th and 19th, to make the best use of what I am going to talk today. Because when I'll talk about Ahankar, you might feel a bit disconnected unless, of course, you already know about it. So assuming that you already know the Panchatattva and Ahankar not as ego but as identity, here we go. You must have noticed that in an electric cell, the 2 poles are marked as positive and negative. It doesn't mean that the side marked with the positive sign is good for us and the other one is bad, right? They are marked so simply because they are opposite in nature and the ends of the cell represent 2 extremes of these opposite characteristics. Marking one end of the cell as positive and the other end as negative is just a convention. Similarly, Sattva and Tamas are 2 extremes of existence, opposing each other. Now, if the 2 poles of a cell were not opposite to each other in characteristics, there would be no flow of electricity between them, and there would be no concept of it being an electric cell, isn't it? Like this, if Sattva and Tamas would not be opposing characteristics, there would be no existence of life in a physical form. Let's not forget that being opposite also means being complementary. It's only the opposing pairs which complement each other, right? I'll explain this in detail later in this episode, so don't worry if this is not completely clear. For now, let's understand that they are like the 2 ends of a thread. In order for the thread to exist, both the ends are needed. When we say Sattva and Tamas are opposite to each other, in very simple terms, it means that Sattva is the experience of our subtle existence or the higher self, and tamas is the physical aspect of our existence. The third characteristic, rajas, is the thread connecting the other two. Now it depends on us which side we get pulled on this thread of our existence. If tamas dominates, we will be pulled towards the physical existence and won't be able to raise ourselves towards the subtle experience of life. It is in this context that we say tamas is a negative attribute, because it hinders our spiritual growth. But if tamas won't be there, we will simply not exist in the physical form. Like a staircase which connects the bottom and top of a building. If you continuously move downwards, you will never reach the top. It's not the fault of the staircase, is it? Spirituality means to experience life beyond the physical aspect. So definitely we have to move away from the body. But the point is that we will not be able to proceed for this journey without the body. So it depends on us whether we make this body a hindrance or a gateway. If it's a hindrance, then in a spiritual context, it is negative. Otherwise, it's a step. Now, let's understand the concept in a different and detailed way, which is more appropriate to the spiritual context. But this might be slightly complex, so please be completely involved with me and visualize what I'm going to say, not just listen and try to memorize. In the process of knowing or perceiving anything, there are three things involved: the known or the object of perception, the knower, one who perceives, and in between the two, there is a process of perceiving. For example, if I see a flower, the flower is the object of perception, my sense of sight is the perceiver, and there is a process of seeing involved. When the process completes, the end result is the knowledge which becomes an integral part of the knower. You cannot separate the knower and the knowledge. In this whole thing, the object of perception is tamas, because it is physical and stationary, which are the attributes of tamas. The process of perceiving is rajas, because a process always indicates something dynamic, connecting the two ends. In this case, the object and the knowledge of the object are the two ends. When the perceiver gains the knowledge in the subtle form and becomes one with it, it is the state of sattva. That is why we say sattva is knowledge. Not the knowledge of maths or science or anything else, rather the knowledge of the creation, knowledge or experience of life itself. Everything that we see in the world is made up of the 5 elements which we call the Panch Tattva: Akash, Vayu, Agni, Jal and Prithvi. They and their associated properties through which they are perceived, Shabd, Sparsh, Roop, Ras and Gandh, make everything an object of perception. And so, taking the analogy from the example I just gave, they are tamasic. They evolve from tamasic ahankar. Don't be surprised with the phrase tamasic ahankar. Here we have to recall what we have been talking about since the previous 2 episodes and connect some dots. Let me explain. Let's recall what we talked about ahankar. Ahankar is the ability to identify ourselves as an individual existence, separate from the universe. Anything made of the 5 elements or Panch Tattva has a separate identity as individual or thing. So, they are the product of ahankar. And because they are physical in nature and can be perceived by the 5 senses, they have tamasic attributes. Connecting the 2 concepts, they evolve from tamasic ahankar. That's the reason anything which is materialistic, including our physical body, is tamasic. Not because it is negative, but because it is made up of tamasic stable elements or panchatattva. This also means that anything that is physical in this universe, the earth, the mountains, the galaxies, are also tamasic. Back to the analogy, the senses of perception, the sense of hearing or shravan, the sense of feeling or tvacha, the sense of sight or chakshu, the sense of taste or jivha, and the sense of smell or ghran are the perceivers, which gain the subtle knowledge of their objects. So they evolve from sattvic ahankar, because they are the perceivers. And I mentioned in the previous episode as well, repeating it here, that it's the ability which we are referring to as sattvic, not the physical sense organ, because as we know, anything which is physical is tamasic. So when I say sense of sight, it doesn't mean the eyes, rather the ability to see. What connects tamas and sattva, or the object of perception and the knowledge of the object, is the rajasic ahankar. So the process of perceiving or the process of identifying is rajasic. And that's why they say you need to have rajas in order to move from tamas to the state of sattva. This is about the three gunas when we see them as the characteristics of Prakriti, the manifest energy. But in general, and in fact more commonly, we talk about the three gunas as the characteristics of an individual or the characteristics of food. We'll talk about them in one of the future episodes. Till then, just think about some points like why the food is categorized as sattvic, rajasic and tamasic. It should all have been tamasic if everything physical is tamasic, as we just understood, isn't it? So do think for yourself before I talk about it. But for now, you at least know that tamasic and sattvic ahankar are not the good and bad self-esteem related stuff. Tamasic ahankar gives rise to everything that can be perceived by the senses in this universe. And because of sattvic ahankar, the subtle knowledge of everything that exists is perceived. Because of the usual perception that tamas is bad and sattva is good, people usually think that we need to reduce tamas and increase sattva, and that's all we need to do to reach the supreme consciousness or God. But it's like when we are using the staircase to reach the top of a building, the topmost step might make us feel that we are on the top. But actually, we need to cross that step as well to reach the top. So we need to rise above everything, tamas, rajas and sattva. We need to rise above ahankar. In the next episode, we'll talk about the remaining three aspects of mind: manas, buddhi and chitta. We have already covered the fourth one, ahankar, so now we'll have a holistic understanding. We'll also talk about memory or smriti and understand its broader meaning. Stay tuned and have a nice time.